In this video, we are going to learn about states in React. So in React components, the component can be re-rendered based on two things, either state changes or prop changes. Now about prop, we have already seen that what is prop. Prop is some data which is passed from external side, right? So this is a component. Now we want to pass some data from outside to this component. Then from outside we can pass something like this, and it will be available like this, or in class component it will be available like this. And when it will be rendered, then whatever data we passed from outside, that is available, right? Now this is one way. Now this thing, if this thing changes from outside, then this will re-render. Re-render means the UI is painted again, UI is changed, and with the new change, the repainting of the browser is happening. That is basically essentially the concept of re-rendering. Okay, now this is one thing how it renders. So when the prop changes from outside, that re-rendering is one way, right? One another way in which a component can re-render is its state changes. And what is state? State is a data which is internal to a component. So this data is external to a component, which means that from outside this data is given to a component, right? But state is something that the data is actually inside. The state is something that the data is inside, then the changes also are done inside. Okay, so right now we are using functional components. Let's firstly try with class components, and then we will get back to functional components. So let's firstly change this to greeting 2, which means that right now this greeting is a class component. This is this component. Okay, now obviously this thing is running fine. What we want to do is that we want to have some sort of data which is internal to this component. Okay, now how to create a data which is internal to this component? We can create some data like let's say counter. So counter is equal to 0. Okay, and now I can use this counter, right? So I can do something like div, let's say counter, and then I can print this data, right? So this dot counter, and I see that this counter 0 is there. That is fine, right? But that is not the main thing. The main thing here, we saw that when this prop is changing, when this Bob is becoming Alex, then you can see that this thing is re-rendering, right? If I change this counter, okay, then does it re-render? So that is a thing. Okay, now it turns out that how do you change this? So either you can create it like this, or you can do something like this, that you can create a constructor. Inside constructor you can call firstly super with props, right? And then inside that you can do something like this dot counter is equal to 0. But then this is like, obviously this is just the creation of it, right? How do you change it? Okay, so that is a problem. Why not we try to do something like this, that we create a timer. So let's say set timeout, and in that set timeout, what I do is that I change this after, let's say, 3 seconds or 2.5 seconds, right? What I do is that I change this value to, let's say, 20. Now you can see that if I refresh, then you can see that it is changed. Obviously this must have run, but this counter does not change. You see, this counter does not change, and that is what the problem with fields is there. Okay, so if you want to see that whether this thing is called or not, then you can just print this thing, and you'll see that after 2.5 seconds this is printed, but this is not changed, which means that this set timeout is called, but this is not changed. Okay, now why 2 times it is printed? See, this 2 is written, which means that 2 times it is printed. Now just ignore that, because we just saw in one of the earlier videos, right, that in dev mode this whole component will run twice. So essentially this set timeout will also run twice. Okay, so that you can ignore, but the idea is that just to prove that this thing was called, for that I told you that yeah, this thing is called and it is changed to 20, but still this is not reflecting. Okay, so how to fix that? In order to fix that, we have a concept of state, that only, that what we do is that if you change directly fields like this, then this is not going to re-render, right? But like props, there is a concept of state, and if you change state, then that thing is automatically re-rendered, and that is being automatically taken care by React itself. So now let's get back to that. How to do that? For that, the syntax is something different. The syntax is that you have to create a field called state, and you cannot name it anything. It has to be state, state, and then you set a data, so something like counter 0 inside. This is like, no, this is like normal object. Whatever data you want, just put it inside. Okay, but it is now inside constructor. Inside constructor only you do something like this. But after constructor, you have to, after constructor you have to update it, right? Now obviously this thing now, now you have to access it here, then you have to access it like this dot state dot counter. Okay, so this is fine, and you can see that this is also working fine. But then how to update it? So for updating, there is a way, to update it, right? And that way is, let me write here only. So set timeout only. So set timeout only. I'm just giving an example. There are better ways to do this, but right now just try to do simpler way. So what I will do is that I will do this dot state is equal to, and let's say counter 10. Actually this is wrong way, I'm just trying to show you this is wrong way, this is not what you should do. Okay, now you can see that what it is saying, that do not mutate state directly, use set state. So this is the warning they are giving you, that this is not the correct way to do it, right? So this is wrong, you should not change it like this. The correct way is that this dot set state, and inside that you set new things what you want. So you want to change counter to 10, then you pass it like that. You set the new object which you and whatever values, whatever state values which you want to change, that you change it here. Okay, so now if you see, then what happens, that this is loaded, and after 2.5 seconds I run this thing, and then it changes, right? So you can see that after 2.5 seconds, this thing is automatically changed. You can clearly see again that this thing is 0, and then after 2.5 seconds automatically changed. Okay, that is fine, so it is working fine. But there is a warning here, you can't call set state on component that is not yet mounted. And why is that error coming? This error is coming because this is run twice, you understand? And the first time when it is running, then that component is unmounted, and again second time this component is re-rendered, right? But that first component did a set timeout of 2.5 seconds, that component unmounted, and now new component is rendered. So for the new component, obviously counter is set and this is working fine. But for the old component which rendered and then which component mounted and then again it unmounted. Mounted means it loaded into the DOM. Unmounted means it removed from the DOM. So you can understand something like this. Okay, but that component is not there, but on that you are trying to do set state. So that's what it is saying, that a component which is not yet mounted. So the whole problem is that, and these are the problems which you can identify early in your development, while your development only because React renders it twice. So when React renders it twice, you will easily see these issues, right? So actually this is not the correct way. Okay, so there is a better way to do this automatically, but right now that we will discuss maybe in the next video or something. Right now I will show you by another way where I manually change this. How to automatically do this? There is something called component did mount or something, which we will learn later. But right now, let's manually do it. Manually do it means whatever we want to do, let's write it in function. So let's say my function name is increment, and that increment function has this thing. And again, you could have called this directly from here also, and that would have also worked in the same manner. Just the difference is that you would have to write this dot. So this is same, but just I am removing this sort of thing now. Now I want to call this function. When I click a button. That is what I'm trying to do. Okay, so let's create a button. And in that button, let's say update. So I just want to update this counter state to whatever I change it. Okay, so on click, I am passing that increment function, but this is a class component, so I have to write something called this dot increment. Okay, so this is what it is. Now you see that yeah, it is zero, but when I click this button, then this function will be called, and when this function will be called, then this dot set state counter is set to 10, which means that when I click, then you can see that it becomes 10. Okay, so now you understand. Okay, so that should be fine. The only thing is that you have to take care that this function should be an arrow function. If this is not an arrow function, then what happens? You tell me. If this is not an arrow function, then what will happen? If this is not an arrow function, then this will be undefined, isn't it? We learned it earlier, right? This will be undefined, and if this will be undefined, then I will get an error right here. So this should be an arrow function, or then we saw earlier that we have to use something called this and the bind, this, all these things we can do, obviously, but the better way is simply just plain and simple, keep it simple, normal pass functions, that's it, but use an arrow function. That is a simpler way, which I generally approach it that way. Okay, so yeah, now this is working fine. Now we have to do one more thing here, is that yeah, this is just one update. So one update 10 done, and then after that, whenever I'm clicking, then it is earlier also 10, now also 10, so nothing is changing, right? I want to increment it, so let's say rather than update, it is like next or increment something is there, and then whenever I click, then it should keep on getting incremented every time rather than just one time. That is one thing. But before I do that, let's get into functional components, that how to implement the same thing in a functional component. So here we are using a class component. Let's get back to functional component, which is this. Now everything is back because now I'm using this component, functional component, and here we have to implement this sort of thing, right? So the thing is that earlier in the earlier versions of React, I think before React 16 or something, the concept of state in functional components was not there, which means that at that point of time, functional components were called dumb components, which means that if like there is just props, nothing else, like, no internal state to this thing, right, then only you use this thing. However, if that is not the case, then you if you, as soon as you want a state, then you switch back to class components. That was the earlier way, right? However, in the recent versions, now you can use internal classes for functional components also, using a concept called hooks. Now hooks is a whole thing altogether, but we'll try to get into that bit by bit. The thing is that right now you simply have to understand that like we have constructor here, and we create state here, and then whenever we want to update state, then we do something like this. In a similar fashion, when we try to use state inside this, then we use something called use state. So there is something called use state, which means that const, I'll get back to it, just an array like syntax is there, destructuring use state. You see that we have imported named import called use state from React. What it does is that in use state you have to pass an argument which will be initial value. So here in the constructor we give the initial value, right? In the constructor we give the initial value. So here the initial value will be given in the argument. So here we give that initial value, okay? And then whatever is the name of the state, whatever is the name of the state, that you have to give it here. And then you use a second argument which is a setter of this state variable. Setter means that if you want to change this, and this should be in camel case, okay? So now what happens? Now it is something like this, that like here counter variable is created, similarly here counter variable is created. Now you can use counter wherever you want inside this component, and whenever you wanted to change this thing, then you used something like this dot set state counter and then whatever thing you want. But here if you want to change anytime, so for example let's say you want to change to 10, then you do call simply call this function like this, and then it will work, okay? So we'll do that later, but for now just use this counter. So here we just had something like this div. Let's copy this from here to here, and then we will use simply this counter variable. So whatever the counter variable is here, that we are able to use it. So you can see that this counter 0 is working fine. So this is fine. Now we have to change it, okay? So for changing it, whatever we did here, we created a simple button, and inside that button we pass some function, right? Now this function you can create on your own here, right? So you can create something like const increment is equal to, and then you can create your own function here, and inside this function you are going to do something like this. Understand? So you can understand that here this was a field, class field. This increment was a class field, which was an arrow function, right? Here it is a simple like everything has to be written inside function only. So what to do? You have to create here. You could have created it outside, but then if you create it outside, then you cannot access things which are internal to the functional component. Here I want to access something which is internal to the component, right? Set counter. Set counter is only defined inside the component, so I cannot move this function outside, okay? So the only way is to define it here. Now what happens that when I click this update, then this function will be called, and when I call this function, then this thing will be called, and it will update the counter variable to 10, and then automatically React will know that I have to re-render it because something has changed. So let's try that out. So I click here, then you can see that now it is 10. Okay, obviously only one time it will take, because every time you are clicking, then again it is being set to 10 only. So that is not much of a difference. We'll see that, we'll change that soon. But now you understood that how this is working, right? There's just one more caveat, is that you understand that this thing is a new variable created every time, okay? So whenever this component is being rendered, every time this function is being created, and it should be fine for now. But I'll just give you a hint that later while we are doing some optimizations, you might not want to create this function again and again. But for that there is some advanced concept where we can use something called use memo or something, but that is another type of hook which is used for optimization. But for now, don't pay attention to that. For now it should be straightforward, that for normal things, even if that thing is created again and again, that should not be a problem. For normal things you can see that it is working fine, okay? So that is all for for this functional components. Now let's try to update this, so that whenever I click, then it should change. It should change based on the previous value. So let's do one thing. let's change it to next, and let's increment just by 1 now. So yeah, 0 becomes 1, but then 1 has to become 2. Okay, so what happens is that we have to take the current counter and add 1 to it. Okay, so if I do that, then 0 becomes 1, 1 becomes 2, and then as you keep on pressing, it becomes 1, increments by 1 every time. Same thing you can do here by doing something called this dot state dot counter plus 1. Yeah, so actually this is wrong way, but let me firstly show you wrong way, and then we'll see. Yeah, so why wrong way? It looks like it is working, right? So what is the problem? See, the problem is that the update of state and the update of props in React is asynchronous. Asynchronous means what? Asynchronous means at, let's say earlier it was 0, and now you think that yeah, 0 plus 1, I am setting it to 1, but when you try to print it here, it might not be 1. Let me show you one thing. So let's firstly print this dot counter dot state. So the first time it will be 0. First time when it is rendered, then it will be 0. That is fine. Now if I click one time, so here also let's change it to next. When I click one time, then it should become 1, right? So I'm setting it to 0, whatever current value is 0 plus 1. Okay, and but when you print here in the next line, so obviously it will become 1, but it is asynchronous, means it will become 1, but when it will become 1, that is not sure. And that's why when you click, then you see that it becomes 1, right? But if you try to okay, so I'm not using greeting 2, I think, here, so I have to change it to greeting 2. So I have to use class component, right? So if you click, then you will see that it becomes 1, but you can see that still it is 0. Yeah, so just for repeating it again, earlier I think the earlier clicking was just done on functional component. So let's see on the class component also. So this thing, you can see that it is working fine, right? But it is not, it will not, might not work always, because that's what I'm trying to show you, that the state updates and the props update are asynchronous, which means that right now if I click one time, then even if it has become 1, but you can see that the printed value is 0, which means that immediately after that when I printed, it is still 0, but after that within some milliseconds it became 1. But when it became 1, so it is not sure that after this line immediately it will become 1. This is called asynchronous. In the next line, the previous line's update is not sure to exist. If it is not sure to be existing in the next line, which means that it is not synchronous, which means that it is asynchronous. Okay, so you can see that this problem is happening, right? See, firstly I will tell you one solution, and then I'll show you the real solution. See, if you simply want to print the real value, okay, so you know that it is asynchronous, right? So I'm not sure that here in the next line this answer will be there, but you can do one thing. You can use a callback function, the second argument. So the first argument is what? The first argument is the values, the object of values which you want to update. The second argument is called when this thing is updated, this set state. When this set state is completed, when this set state is completed, then this second argument, if you provide any callback function, then that will be called, which means that if you now print it here, then it will be working perfectly fine. You can see that it becomes 1, and here also 1 is printed. So that is one thing. Okay, but still the problem exists. See, the problem exists that if I, let's say I click one time, not two times, just I click one time, and let's say I do multiple things. Multiple things means, let's say when I click one time, then I do like this, two set states I do, right? Then ideally it looks like that, yeah, this dot state dot counter, earlier it was 0, it should become 1, and then now it should become 1, from 1 it should become 2, right? If it would have been synchronous, then it would have been 2. but that will not be the case, right? You will see that even if you click and two set states you have done, but then also it was becoming one. Why? Because when in the second line you ran it, then by that time this might not be guaranteed to be one. So actually it was zero only, and that's why the second set state also did set it to one, the first set state also set it to one, so the final value is still one, not two. But again, if you did something like this in the callback, right, in the callback if you did something like this, means the second set state is only called when the first set state is complete. And why I can guarantee that? Because the first set state is complete, then only this callback will be called in which the second set state is there. And that's why when I do this and then I click once, then I will get two. But again, you can see that this thing is not good, right? This thing is like clumsy. So this thing is clumsy. This should not be that hard, okay? But this is how it is right now. It is not working, okay? So what to do? So for solving that, there is another form of set state. That another form of set state is something like this. Rather than passing an object, I'll just show you the another form. So rather than doing this, you do something like this. Rather than passing a object, you pass a function. So you pass a function, and from that function you return an object which you wanted to set. But what is the advantage now? The advantage now is that this object which you are going to return from here, that can take the advantage of take the value of the current state, which means that current state is passed as an argument, which means that here you can use state dot counter like this. Rather than this dot state dot counter, which is like global this dot state, now you can use this state variable which is passed as an argument to this thing. So you can see that now the argument to this dot set state is not an object, it is a function, and that function's first argument is state, which means that if you use this thing, then state dot counter is actually the state at the time when this thing is called, which was not the case here, right? Here if you used two times like this, then right, and then when this dot set state is called, then actually what object you passed, that object was created right now. And what was right now? Right now this dot set state was still, dot counter was still zero, so this value is incorrect. But if you use like this, then the state value is the value of the state at the time this dot set state is being executed, and that would be correct, right? And that's why obviously one time when you run, then it would be correct. But even if you do it twice, right, then also you'll see that one time I click and it becomes 2. Why? Because yeah, one time I clicked, both set state got scheduled. I know that it is asynchronous, that is fine. But then even if both are bunched together and runs after some time together, but then when this ran, then it got the current state. Current state was 0, and that's why 0 plus 1 became 1. But when the second ran, then it got the current state. Now current state is 1, and that's why current state 1 means current state dot counter is 1, and then it got current state dot counter 1, and then 1 plus 1 is 2, and that's why when the second ran, then it correctly set the value to 2 because it was using the current state rather than the previous state which was being used here, okay? So if you do something like this is actually the correct solution. So this is the way how you should do. So I just tried it using like multiple set state just to show you that how it works. But even if there is only one set state, then also you should use this fashion rather than earlier fashion. So what is the crux? The crux is that if your next state is not dependent on the previous state, then you used it. So let's say I want to set it to 20, which I was doing earlier, right? So counter I have to hard code it to 20, right? Then why to do that? I will simply take this and I will do this dot set state, and then I will hard code it to 20, right? I'll just hard code it to 20. So right now it is not dependent on some other thing, right? Or let's say it is dependent on some variable which you know that it is static, then it is fine. But if the new state which you want to set is dependent on the previous state, then this is the way to go. This is the way to go, right? In fact, in this form, there is also a second argument. There is also a second argument, which is props. So generally this is rarely used, but you can use this also. So this props, so like this state is different from this dot state, which gives the state at the point at this dot state is running. Similarly, this props is actually similar to this dot props, but if in some way props is also changing while it is being set state, that time it is rendering re-rendering, or from outside some prop is changing, then it is generally not that much used, but still this second argument prop will be the prop at the time this dot set state is running. So this might be helpful in some scenarios, so just pay attention to that. So that what can be that scenario? That can be scenario for example, rather than incrementing by 1, you are incrementing it by let's say some value which is being passed from here. So let's say from here you are passing that like in like something like in increment by something, like you are passing, and then you are saying that you increment by 2, and then this increment by is you are using here. So you can use something like props dot increment by, right? So in this manner, if you click once, then it becomes 2. If you click one more time, it becomes, so now it increments by 2, not 1. So that can be done. But now you might think that, yeah, I should use I can use this dot props dot increment by also, but right, but the same thing, like here also it looks like it is working fine, but the same thing which we saw earlier, that yeah, this dot state dot control is also working, right? But it is not guaranteed that that will work, right? In some such situations that might not work, because we saw some of the situations. Similarly here also, if by the time this dot set state is running, by that time, let's say from outside this increment by is changed, then then only you will see that rare scenario. Otherwise most of the times you will not see that scenario. So just in that manner, sometimes that might be helpful, the second argument, but mostly that is not that much used. But however, for state dependency, this is like very much, this first argument is very much used. Okay, so yeah, that should be fine. That should be fine. So now we can see that our class component is also working like incrementing perfectly, right? Now one more thing is that the changes which we are doing, those changes are merged with the earlier thing, right? So let me show you one thing. So let's say right now you are printing the state. So whatever state is there, whenever it like it prints, right? So I click, then I see that 1 is there. Now I click, then now it is 2. So that is fine, right? But let's say I have a separate variable. Let's say anything. Let's say ABC is I don't know, like hello or anything. So the first thing you have to understand is that things are merging, which means that when you are setting set state counter, essentially you are setting a counter, right? Whatever you are returning, that thing is in. So you are setting counter, but it does not mean that you are setting counter means that ABC is gone. If you see, then ABC will be as it is, just the counter will change. Okay, so now ABC is as it is, but counter is changing. Similarly, if you change ABC, then counter will remain active, which means that whatever the changes you are doing using this dot set state, that is not the change to the whole state object. Rather, whatever you are returning, or whatever, if not non-function, if directly object you are passing in set state, whatever you are changing, that those keys and values what you are setting, only that thing is set, and it is merged with the original state, which means that's why you see this statement at many places, that in React state is merged. Okay, and how do you so these are like this is what, like multiple states, right? Multiple states means the state object has multiple multiple key value pairs, means the counter is also a state, ABC is also a state. How do you do this in functional component? Turns out in functional component, for each one you have to create separate set state, which means that you have to do something like const ABC is equal to use state, and then whatever is the initial value. What is the initial value you are using here? Hello, right? So let's use hello as the initial value, right? And then you can use wherever you want. So here, let's say wherever you want to use so there is no such this dot state we know. So here at most we can print something like this, that both counter and ABC we can print. Okay, so right now it is obviously function class components, so let's change it to functional components, and then we will see that yeah, 0 hello is printed. If I change it, then hello is as it is, and this thing is changing, counter is changing. Okay, so that is how it is working. Now again, here you are not using the second argument. Why? So actually what happens, that use state, you can understand it like that, use state returns an array where the first argument is the first element is the variable, second element is the setter of that variable, right? Now this is destructured assignment of ES6, we know already this, right? So in destructured assignment, if I just took the first variable, then it is going to give me the variable, right? If I am going to use the second variable also, then it is going to be giving me the setter. For ABC, I'm not using the second variable because I don't want to modify it, let's say. But there's no purpose. Generally, if you create states, then you must be needing to modify it somewhere. So you can again you can name it anything. You can name it I don't know, XYZ, anything. So generally, but the convention is they use set and then in camel case the same variable name. Now this is unused right now, but let's say you wanted to update this hello to world or something. Then so for example, let's say when I click on increment, then I set ABC to world. Let's say that is my requirement. Okay, then you can see that yeah, when I click, then this becomes 1 and this becomes world, right? But then if you don't want that, then you can just not use that also, so that is fine. So that is one thing in which you can use multiple state variables like class components, where in class components you can set all the variables at once directly here only, but there you have to create separate use state things. Okay, yeah, so that will be all, I believe, for state for now. Coming back to functional components, let me tell you one more thing. So right now greeting 2, which is class component, we are using this class component, which means that as and when we are running this is class component greeting 2 is being run. But here we saw two formats, right? One is that set state and directly an object we can set whatever we want to set, and another one is this functional style, where we can pass a function instead of a normal object which we want to set, right? You might be wondering that what about functional components? In the functional component in set counter, do we have a syntax similar to this or not? Turns out we have, which means that yeah, so if we change this to simply greeting, and you can see that we are let's say clicking once, then one, clicking once, then it is becoming two, right? You might be wondering that yeah, let's try something like this, something like this. So one time when I click, then set counter is called two times. Initially it is 0. Let's try to run it. I click it, then you see that it becomes 1. Okay, it should become 2, right? And next time when I click, it becomes 2. So you are seeing that what is happening is that even if I do it 2 times, even if I do it 2 times, this thing is not being executed, not being changed to from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2 two times. And that is and the reason is that this counter which is being captured is the current counter, right? This is executed asynchronously, so even if you come to the second line, the counter is still 0 only, not 1. So this is not running synchronously, it is running asynchronously, and that's why this is happening. The same thing which we saw here. In fact, in order to resolve that issue, here also we have a syntax of function based argument also, which means that rather than doing directly like this, like directly take this variable and then do +1, we have a function, and then you can return a value. So basically this will be old value, and then you can return old value plus 1, right? So what is this? What is this old value? You can understand that this is old value of the variable for which this is a setter, which means that this is setter for what? This is setter for counter. Okay, so this old value is essentially old counter. So you can write it clearly like old counter also, right? And then this is basically old counter plus 1. So now it is very much clear, right, that when I run this, so now like it will run similar, but now if I simply do the same thing 2 times, then you can see that when I click once, then it is becoming 2, again 1 time, then it is becoming 4, because now that asynchronous, that thing, that race condition is gone, right? Why? Because when this thing is running, then it is taking the current old value is 0, I'm sure, right? And then 0 plus 1 1 is being set, and when this is being run, then it is fine. There is no current counter being captured like earlier. Now there is a function passed, which means that later when this will be run, then it will take the current counter value of at that time, and at that time the current counter value will be 1, because this has already run, and then only this is being executed, right? Then will be 1, which means that the value passed here will be 1, and then it will be 1 plus 1 2, similar to like here, right? How it was. It's just that the similar syntax like here, it is also like here. The difference is slight, that since this is like set state for a general state object, and that's why you have to return also a general object where whatever the key value pairs you want to set. But here each setter is a separate separately called for each separate state value, right? And that's why this function is specifically for only this old counter, not this, right? So for example, here if you want to set set state and get this current state, and then you want to modify 2 variables, then you can do the whole thing here only, like separated by comma, right? But you cannot do it here, because each value will have, so here you will have let's say for another variable you will have another use state and this whole thing, and you will have another set variable for setter for that variable, so you have to use that separately. So this function is specifically about this variable only. So that is the only difference. Apart from that, everything else is same. So we should be good to go in this case. Yeah, but before we close the video, let me tell you one thing, that whatever we discussed till now, that is the core of React. Everything what we learn next will be built on top of it, but this is the crux of React, that whatever the change in the UI is happening, we are not iteratively doing that and going there and doing that. Rather, React is taking care of that everything. We are just interested in state and props. So the whole UI which is rendered is a function of either props or state. It depends on either props or state. We just take care of that proper state and proper props should be there. If we want to change some UI, then we just directly change props or directly change state, and then how this UI is updated, we don't care. Okay, so that is what the beauty of React is. That for example, we know that the counter, after counter this 0 is there, and then that 0 has to be incremented. Then this dot state dot counter, we know that this is the state variable on which this piece of UI depends. Then when I click on next, then I just go and update that counter, that's it. So essentially we have just updated the state, we have not updated the DOM, we have updated the state. And how to create the new DOM from this state is taken care by React, right? Which means that if you go here and inspect, and you see that yeah, somewhere counter 0, this is written, right? When I click on next, then you see that this automatically becomes 1. When I click here, it automatically becomes 2. But we are not going that get element by id or get element by tag this div, and then inner text is equal to that. We are not doing that, automatically React is doing. Obviously React is doing the same thing. React is not using other than anything what JavaScript or HTML can provide, right? So React is internally doing that thing, but it has made our life much easier by taking all that heavy lifting away from us. What we do is that we take care that this is our UI, what logic or what data this UI depends on, and then we write that logic, and then we maintain that data, and rest everything React takes care of it. Okay, it looks like a very simple thing, but after years and years of iteration, now we have reached this level of like maturity in the UI ecosystem, such that things like this is possible. And if you might be wondering, this is only possible from the last 7 8 years, 6 7 years, right? So this is like pretty good, right? So yeah, so this is the main core idea of React, and then we'll build on top of that. Apart from that, I also wanted to mention that yeah, so this component is stateful, which means that it has its state, right? There, if we remove the state, then this is not stateful, just it is like stateless. It just depends on the external props. Other than that, this component does not have any state of itself. Now that thing is an implementation detail of a component. Other components don't have to bother about these things, right? This is internal to this component, which means that whether a component is stateless or stateful, nobody else should care other than the component itself. At the same time, whether the component is functional component or class based components, again, this is like internal detail of that component. Others should not bother about this, because both will, whether a function is whether a component is implemented as a class based components or functional component, in both cases, if the functionality is implemented correctly, then both will behave exactly the same way, right? So it does not matter. In fact, here, like let's say you are using this component. Now this component is just a component. How this is implemented, nobody should care, right? Internally it can be a class component, it can be a functional component. In fact, you can see that this is a functional component. Inside that you can use a class component. Again, inside a class component you can use functional component. That also you can do. Similarly, there is a stateful component. Inside that stateful component you can use stateless component. Now this is a stateless component. Inside that I am using a stateful component. Greeting. So all of those things can be done, and those are implementation details of a particular component. Other than that, nobody else should care about that. Okay, so I believe about React states this should be enough to get started. So that's all for this video. Thanks a lot.